Hi there, Adapters and Adapter GreenXers. It is great to have you back as always. Today, we are going to talk about how the Energy and Environment Alliance is making it easy for the hospitality sector to deliver meaningful sustainability outcomes by 2030 and beyond. I know it's a tall order, but check out our conversation with Ufi Ibrahim, CEO of the Energy and Environment Alliance, and Dr. Marc Lepere, who's the co-founder and Chief Science Officer at ESGgen Limited and lead in ESG Sustainability Executive Education at King's Business School, King's College, London. We are going to chat a lot about the main outcomes from the EEA's recent summit that you can apply to your business and regular life. So let's start listening. Hi, everybody. It's great to have Ufi and Marc here. I got to tell you, this is going to be one hell of a quick conversation about a very long topic. Ufi, we've just come off a wonderful summit with EEA. Major takeaways that came out of this. Can you run us through the takeaways? Because we're going to cover a lot in the podcast, but then we're going to get back to standards. So Ufi, please tell us the essence of the conference.
Essence of the conference is that ESG is most likely the single biggest opportunity for our industry in terms of business. And there are some critical points that one has to be prepared for in order to leverage that opportunity. The first being data, benchmarking, standards, having a common language with which to be able to assess, and also having the right pathways to be able to ensure that people can measure and report information from the concierge all the way up to your chairman of the board. Collaborate and partnership. This is an unprecedented transition to net zero and to ESG in many, many respects. Even though technologies may exist, we don't really know necessarily how to utilize those technologies and embed them in our businesses. So collaboration, partnership, sharing know-how to enable us to do that. And why throw away value? This whole thing that this is all about value. We're building value around the circular economy, for example. How do we create value and build value in our industry rather than throwing a lot of that value away? Opportunities abound. We're talking about how we can ensure that we're moving from stranded asset risk to significantly, leverage asset values. No judgment, leadership. These are the 6 critical points that we covered at the summit.
I mean, you've set the standard for how to have a common language within, hospitality 2.0, right? And in the ESG world. Can you just share with us what that pathway to that common language is? It's complex.
It's complex in the built environment. There are many definitions, for example, of what net zero carbon actually means. Same thing for social impact. It's up to us as an industry to define the common definitions for the hospitality sector itself. To do that, we are working with a whole cohort of experts and with the industry, working for the industry, by the industry, experts including the ISSB, BREEAM, many others around the world, to ensure that we create those common definitions, which will give clarity and will provide the right pathways for our industry to be able to measure, benchmark, and ensure that all of that is in line with global standards, be that for financial disclosure or for regulatory purposes, in terms of compliance or any other reason, valuations, for example, or benchmarking whether what I'm doing is actually good or even good enough.
This sounds like an anthropological exercise, where there's a new language being invented to make it common across so many jurisdictions, cultures, and of course, systems. Marc, when you think about what you led and what you moderated to get us all through the day, big themes like collaboration and why throw away and opportunities. Can you give us a little bit more insight into what you meant by that and what you wanted to deliver from that?
Yeah, I think the common language is a really good starting point, Seán. And in business, the language of business really is data in order to inform decision making. And I think so much of the world at the moment, hospitality industry is no different to many others, is actually organized in silos, in truth, lined up as ostensible value chains. But really, it's about, I want this out of this contract, you want that out of this contract, and you want this out of that contract. And we need to reframe that whole exercise, I think, into seeing opportunity across the whole piece. And that's really only possible if you're all talking the same language. And I think the idea of collaborating together is quite anathema to a lot of industries. For instance, in the hospitality sector, what the asset manager may want because he owns the property may be quite different to what the hotel manager needs to do to keep his guests happy. And somehow they both have to collaborate to make this sustainable future that we all want. In terms of throwing value away, Ufi there mentioned reuse and recycle and repair and use less effectively and use differently. And I think that's, again, really important, not just in hospitality, but everywhere. If you think about it right now, we create value and we throw it all away to zero. We waste it. As opposed to, I've used it for 10 years, I can retain 70, 80% of it by repairing it, for instance. If we think about opportunities, Lord Teverson spoke, as you remember, at the summit, and he laid out two key government challenges, one around buildings and one around diet. So buildings obviously crucial to the net zero transition for the country, and a fantastic opportunity for the hospitality industry to really make a difference, to refurb these buildings, to make them carbon friendly, if you will.
What was very impactful, I think, when we were listening to so many experts like Gillian Charlesworth, the CEO of BRE, with over 15 years with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and now bringing that built environment experience and leadership into the conversation, which I thought was a great crossover conversation. Ufi, when you've reached out to leaders like Gillian and others, what has been their response to this focus on hospitality? What's the reaction to that from a no judgment or leadership perspective?
Well, first of all, one of the things that Gillian would say is that when we get to 2050 and all of our built environment is supposed to have transitioned to net zero carbon, 80% of the buildings there are already here. So in terms of leadership focus, one should start by focusing on existing assets. And Gillian would be the first to say that you can actually achieve a huge amount by focusing on your operations of your existing asset and the performance of your existing asset, and looking at the gaps between where the building was actually performed, built to perform in one way, and yet it's performing in another. And addressing and identifying those gaps is critical. So we're not necessarily talking about huge amounts of capex initially to make this transition, which brings us back to this point of, okay, how do we do it? The question isn't really about whether we should do it or not. The question is how. How do we equip? And what I welcome in terms of the leadership shown by people like Gillian of Ibrahim is she mentioned the word selflessness at the summit, which was, for me, rang very, very true, where she said that, they are working to ensure that there is a harmonization of critical global standards in a selfless way, because there are so many standards across the world. And that's really important for an industry like ours, as we start to think about how we are going to transition our existing assets to become net zero carbon. So I think that seeing that leadership from people like Gillian, seeing that openness, that willingness to collaborate, not just directly with our industry, but also with the other standard setters around the world, was something that I welcomed very, very much.
So many great sound bites from the event that I encourage everybody to find a way to either listen to what we're doing, get involved with EEA, get involved, reach out to Ufi, reach out to Marc. They are experts in the space and setting a real language for all of us to learn. We will make sure that everybody knows how to contact EEA and reach out to Marc. They're experts. They're going to connect you to a whole new network of experts that is going to make it much easier for us to deliver on the 6 outcomes that came from the EEA Summit this week. Check it out, and we will see you next time. And by the way, check us out on the podcast. That's where the real conversation begins. Thanks again to Marc. Thanks again to Ufi, and we'll see you next time.